Hey, this is Zach Glug the Great, and I am here tonight with a couple of friends to discuss G.K. Chesterton's poem, The Aristocrat. I'm here with Chris,
Hello.
and we are joined tonight by a special guest, Mr. Tom Simon,
Hello.
and author, and let's see, most recently was Where Angels Die. Is that correct?
Yep. And actually,
Okay.
I have got a new book just coming out. It's a silly little thing though. It's called Writer's Block: An Insider's Guide.
And where would that be found?
You can find that on Amazon. Right now, only the print edition is live. I have a couple of little technical glitches to work out before putting out the ebook. It has weird formatting, so I'm still working on that.
I hope it stays on Amazon. Apparently, that's now a question these days, which is troubling.
Yes, well,
Um,
I did have to leave a page intentionally blank because it offends liberals. I also left a page intentionally blank because it offends conservatives. In fact, all of the pages are blank for one reason or another, and the text of the book entirely consists of the explanations why these pages are blank. So if you have any writer friends who are suffering from writer's block, buy this because misery loves company. Give it to them.
gotcha. Okay, so since you are the guest tonight, would you care to start us off talking about the poem?
I can do that. I can do that. I just need to bring up the text in a new window so that I don't have to go away from you all. There.
Oh,
I do not have multiple monitors, and so things get crowded here. You know, I think a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to get to the devil's little place at what's its name that Chesterton refers to in the poem, and it's rather like what C.S. Lewis described as the inner ring. You know, it's people want to be included in exclusive social circles, and they'll do the most amazingly awful things to get there.
it's
And once you get there, the view is never worth the climb. I mean, the key line in the whole poem to me is, there are souls more sick of pleasure than you are sick of pain.
Yeah, that is like seriously the punchline, the not punchline, it isn't a joke, but the big hit of this poem. Um, and it's actually kind of funny because I remember and I've read quite a bit of C.S. Lewis, but it's been quite a while, and so like I can remember a lot of things he said, but I can never point to where it came from. And I remember at one point he said something to the effect of that he made a point never to write about temptations that he himself has not experienced. Not necessarily done the thing, but at least experienced the temptation. And it's kind of weird to me because he talks about like the inner circle and wanting to like get inside this like social sphere, and from his own perspective and his own advice, so to speak. That's something I would never be able to write about because it's just not something that has had that big a pull on me. It's like, okay, there's those, like, I understand like wanting money or wanting influence, but just wanting to be like one of the cool kids or wanting to be inside like the right group has never been a big that big a draw for me. But
There's
uh
this is a good thing about being eccentrics like us. The freaks, geeks, and weirdos have a certain amount of insulation from it because there are things that we really prefer to do for their own sake rather than for being included in some group.
well, that also points right back to something else C.S. Lewis said. I think it was in Screwtape Letters where he says like that people's personal tastes things people just happen to like because it's them is one of their best defenses against social against our temptations, and that having to throw away something because it's not the right kind of thing, it's not what you're supposed to want. I mean, okay, talking about normal healthy desires, not
yeah.
But
yeah, I think Screwtape said something about how many a man has been saved from a strong temptation to I don't think he used the phrase the inner ring in that book, but that kind of temptation by a still stronger taste for tripe and onions.
But Chris, what were your first thoughts on this one?
My first thought is it kind of reminds me of a type of fairyland, which, having read a decent amount of Chesterton, it kind of, I can see him doing that somewhat intentionally. But whereas normally in fairyland, where you're given like too much pleasure, it's not that they're trying to hurt you. It's just that it's a very alien place with sort of a different sort of morality. It just works differently. Whereas here, it's sort of like that fairyland, except it's intentionally trying to deceive you and hurt you.
Yeah, and it's he says like Mr. Simon brought up earlier, there are souls more sick of pleasure than you are sick of pain, and like you hear about the big example, the big name that's on everyone's, that's still fresh to everyone's mind would be like Harvey Weinstein in Hollywood, or like, and just the kinds of things that have been going on with that, and you're like, I wonder if that describes like that like that's the kind of thing I think of with that. It's like just the people who, like, I can't imagine what that does, acting that way, treating other people that way does to you after a while. Like, it has to change who you are, and it has to leave a mark, and like there have to be moments of reflection where you're thinking like, what am I, and what is this for anymore? And it's I think that describes that kind of thing very well.
Yeah, it's fundamentally, it's about addictive behavior, and it's about the kind of addictive behavior that gets approved of socially for a long time, not indefinitely, because like the man said, you can't fool all of the people all of the time. But somebody like Weinstein fooled enough of the people long enough and had enough power that the others pretended to be fooled. You can really go a long way on that trip to the Devil's Little Place at what's its name, with the kind of connections and influence that you get from a position like that.
And then also, whenever you surround yourself with the sort of people that will either do those things for you or just let you get away with it, your fundamental sense of reality starts to change.
Yeah, exactly.
I hadn't, because like if you do these kind of things for a long time, if you're the kind of person who can get away with these kind of things for a long time, you're only going to be around people at some point who are okay with that at some level, or at least okay with using that for their own purposes. And so, yeah, you are going to start to lose touch with, like, oh, a lot of people would object to what I'm doing right now. It might make somebody angry. And it's, yeah.
And then suddenly, one day, you find that you're not a member of that exclusive club anymore, and all the people who have saved up that anger for all those years are suddenly against you. You don't have a friend in the world. That's what happened to Weinstein. That's what happened to Bill Cosby, which in my view, is a really tragic thing, because he was a very funny and talented man who had this one obsession that he indulged and shouldn't have, and it destroyed him in the end.
It's a oh gosh. Well, and the weird thing, like we're getting slightly off the topic, but that happens with these. That's okay. The weird thing with Cosby, with some of those kind of stories, the women talk about, oh, I went to meet him in his hotel room at 9:30 at night by myself, and I'm like, okay, I'm not excusing anything he did, but what did you think was supposed to happen at that point? What were you planning on?
It's like the commercial, a commercial for Rice Krispies that ran a number of years ago. What did you think they were made of?
But at the same time, there's still this idea of, like, for women in the industry, that's what you have to do. So it's not just changing your own reality in a way. When you get enough people playing the same game, like people who want in, they start having to do things that they don't want to do, and they just feel like that's normal. That's what's expected.
Yeah, and the idea that this is like ending is like, it's like, and I've heard some people who have been on the edges of, like, the Hollywood world, like, Bill Whittle, and a little bit from Milo Yiannopoulos, talking about these kind of things, and when things are so subjective, like when there's not, like, solid numbers on, this thing or that you produce X amount and you get Y reward. And also when, the prime thing that they're trading in, Hollywood, the images is young, attractive people. It's like, yeah, this is going to keep happening. Like, I don't care what kind of talk is going on about Cleveland. Like, no. Anyway.
Yeah, so, well, there came to be a point where they could get more advantage out of pretending to be morally outraged by this stuff than by continuing to do it.
Oh, yeah.
I believe firmly that the tipping point for that was the election of Donald Trump. The idea that Trump's past indiscretions could cause him to be nailed to the wall and, oh, goodness gracious, maybe impeached, probably influenced a considerable number of people to say, okay, well, let's condemn everybody who does this just so we won't look like we're picking on him. But hey, we'll get rid of Trump. Hasn't worked so far because the man wasn't concealing that he was, I think everybody knew that he had a certain amount of sleaze in his history, and it's not like this has come as a surprise to anyone. So it's kind of backfired.
Yeah, and the other thing with that is, like, who are the vast majority of people who this is, like, blowing up on is they're all, like, leftists and male feminists, and it's like it's kind of a bit of an own goal largely. And then you see these stories and you think about how much they mocked Mike Pence. Not just mocked, but, like, they said, like, this was some kind of, they said this was some kind of injustice towards women. His policy of, never even having dinner alone with another woman than his wife. Yeah. And it's like, now you know why.
Mm-hmm. And that's an excellent point. And you're not going to see anybody pull a Me Too on Mike Pence for that reason. He knew what the dangers were. He knew, I don't know whether he was particularly tempted to do stuff like that, but he made a very clear decision not to even appear that he might be doing stuff like that. And that was a very wise thing to do.
Yeah.
He got the invitation to the little place at what's his name, and he didn't go.
Yeah, it's, yeah. So, yeah, back to the poem a little bit. One thing I find interesting in this one, in the first stanza, because we've largely been focusing on the second, and
Yeah.
it's he said, what is it? He and got by mastery the starry crown of God Himself and shoved it on the shelf. And it's interesting, for a Christian to write this because it's like the idea of Satan actually seizing God's crown is like kind of, excuse me, kind of confusing and difficult to like square with what we usually think of this. Which I have see. My thing is, I'm kind of thinking of that as like well, I'll hey Chris, what do you think of that part?
Well, if we're getting into that sort of thing, there actually, was a point where Satan struck a pretty big blow against God. It just turned out that was part of God's plan. So Satan has a lot to brag about. It's just in the end, that's what is his ultimate undoing.
Yeah. Go ahead.
There's a lovely phrase from I, Claudius, the book, not the TV series, where Claudius talks about this temple where they kept the reputed, I think it was the shield of Romulus and the spear of Aeneas, I think. And he says, both forgeries in my opinion, but such early forgeries that they're practically genuine. What the devil exhibits as the stolen crown of God is a forgery, but it's a very, very antique forgery.
Well, and yeah, like the other when I was thinking about that, I'm like, what can I make what can I make of this? And it's it's kind of part of the Christian story of how the world is. Like, basically God said to Adam and Eve, okay, I'm God, I'm in charge, but this world I'm putting in your care. This is yours now. And then, well, actually, we don't really know the time. We don't really know how long because, in the old stories, like in Genesis, all of them lived like 600 years or something. So maybe it was quite a while. They managed to keep it straight, but eventually, Satan managed to persuade them to break pretty much their one rule. And, at that point, basically, they handed control of what was supposed to be theirs over to him. And that's why in the New Testament, Satan is referred to as, the God of this world or the Prince of the Air. And we are effectively in enemy occupied territory.
Yeah, and it's also important to realize in this section here, it's saying all of the amazing things that the devil can do, but then it ends with but the devil is a gentleman and doesn't brag himself. But the problem is like who's saying these things about him? Just like at the end, the very last line, it's for the devil is a gentleman and doesn't keep his word. It's like, well, those things are opposite of what a gentleman is, but those are what the devil's doing. So I get the sense it's one of those people that's kind of like just sort of talking themselves up, but I don't want to brag.
Well, and it's and that's actually something I wasn't 100% sure. The very last line, what to take from it, like because was like you said, not keeping his word is not what a gentleman does. And I don't know whether, all three of us, grew up in America, and the idea of a noble class is, kind of a mildly foreign concept to us. I'm afraid we may be headed that way again. But he said, so I don't know whether Chesterton was actually saying he is a gentleman and he doesn't keep his word, because gentlemen don't actually do that. And it's also a question of like, is he talking about gentleman as in someone who acts properly, or gentleman as in someone with a title?
Well, I think he was. He was talking about the class of people, not exactly those with titles, but those with coats of arms and who are landowners and and so forth. There's quite a lot of stuff in elsewhere in Chesterton where he's talking about how that class of people was basically co-opted and taken over by plutocrats. People buying titles with money that they sometimes made in pretty shady ways. He was personally exposed to some of the worst of that because the shadiest money men tended to get titles for themselves and then buy newspapers, and he was a journalist. It's very similar to what's going on in the U.S. today with ownership of the media.
Well, and it's there is. I love the guy. I love his books. I love his writing. There is a mild socialist streak in Chesterton that kind of disturbs me. But nobody's perfect. So
he has several bees in his bonnet about different subjects, but the aristocracy was one of them. If I could put it in one sentence, I would say his attitude towards the aristocracy is that it's a wonderful thing as long as nobody ever takes it seriously.
That was, I remember one of his essays. He talks about, in Europe, the nobility was always, the European nobility has always been a bit of an aristocracy, has always been a bit of a joke. Admittedly, during the Crusades, they may have worked themselves up to a practical joke.
Yes.
But and where he was comparing it to, I guess either China, China and the Far East or the Middle East. I can't remember. But let's see what else. Oh. Now, I hadn't thought about that before. This is interesting. Usually, I see these things while I'm working on memorizing these poems. Usually, these insights drift up. It is an interesting line there. And asks you down to say, at his little house at what's its name, it isn't far away, and it really isn't. It's never far away to. It's never going to be hard to, fall into one of these patterns that, can very quickly, you said, someone said it was, somewhat about addiction, and it's never far away to fall into something that can eventually chain you down and just rip you up like that.
Yeah, half the time we're walking that way anyway.
Seems we've hit a bit of a stall point.
Well, it wasn't a stall point. You looked like you were going to say something, and I was politely waiting for you, and then nothing came out.
No, I don't have anything right now. So if one of you wants to jump in,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the beginning of the second verse, we have kind of an obvious biblical allusion to, like, if your, eyes cause you to sin, pluck it out. And he takes it a little bit further with the, like, and lose your love and shave your head. It's like the shave your head, like, that's basically a mark of shame, correct? Or mourning?
Mourning or repentance, yeah. And
so,
go ahead.
Yeah, and lose your love, like, it's already drastic enough, but the just lose your love, it's just, I'm just not quite sure exactly what he's going with there.
I mean, it's like, in the original, in Jesus' instructions, he said, if your eye causes you to offend, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. And it's just, I guess it would be extending that. There's nothing worth ending up in this place. Even if it's another person, even if it's someone you care about a lot, if they're taking you down this road, they're probably not someone you need around. Or, yeah.
And it can also mean giving up a thing that you love, or giving up an ambition, or that is what is the occasion of this temptation.
Well, it's the other thing towards the towards the end of this, he says, "What is it? Where life droops like a vulture that once was such a lark," and that actually reminds me of and it's C.S. Lewis book again, in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and what's his Edmund had been given this wonderful Turkish delight, and he was promised that if he would turn over his brother and sisters, he would come to the queen's palace and he would get more of this. And then when he actually arrives, instead of sitting on a throne and having Turkish delight every day, he gets thrown into a dark room, and here's some stale old bread and some dirty water. And it's a really fantastic picture of temptation and sin, and that every time you're promised something, temptation promises you, come on in, it's going to be fantastic, it's going to make you so happy, and every single time you end up with, why did I do this? Why? This is not what I wanted, and I don't feel right anymore. And it's where the splendor of the daylight grows drearier than the dark.
Yeah, the really subtle point with Edmund and the White Witch is that yes, she was like the devil, who is a gentleman and doesn't keep his word. The temptation that you are, the thing that you're promised, that you're tempted with, is not what you get. But what she was actually tempting him with chiefly was something that he had been brought to Narnia to do, which was to become king. He and Peter and Susan and Lucy were supposed to sit on the throne and end the reign of the White Witch. Well, she offered to make him king of Narnia as her consort. So she was just bribing him with something that he didn't know he was already getting. And so it really cost her nothing, even if she had kept her promise. But no, the Turkish delight turned into stale bread, and the throne turned into a dungeon.
And that's the there's actually another in Perelandra, they're told, basically their apple is, you don't stay, you will not stay overnight on the fixed land.
Yeah.
And then what ends up after they make it through this, after they pass their Eden test, is that they actually are effectively crowned and take their thrones on fixed land. I don't know if there's more than one, but that's where this takes.
In fact, they were warned against that one island. I just happened to reread Perelandra the other day, and they were warned against that one island partly so that they would go away from it and wind up on the island where they were crowned on a different part of the planet.
And it's another case of what temptation promises you is something you ought have, something you will have in its right form, but it's it takes patience, it takes doing what you ought to get there. And on on a side note, um, Perelandra is I like Out of the Silent Planet, but Perelandra is absolutely the it has one of the most imaginative, one of the most like distinctive visual like the idea of those floating islands, where it feels like land, but it's going up and down over these waves, and it's really fantastic picture and a beautiful, just beautiful world building.
Yes.
It's one that element of it is one of my favorite things in his writing.
Chris, are you still with us?
I'm still with us, just nothing to add at the moment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm actually. Usually I have quite a bit more, but I'm just running dry pretty quickly tonight.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. I would like to read another little quote from Chesterton that I think ties in with some of the things that we've been saying. When we were talking about, both in Perelandra and in Genesis, the temptation of the first humans, and this is a fundamental thing. It's Chesterton calls this idea the core of ethics. He says this idea, which is the core of ethics, is the core of the nursery tales. The whole happiness of fairyland hangs upon a thread, upon one thread. Cinderella may have a dress woven on supernatural looms and blazing with unearthly brilliance, but she must be back when the clock strikes 12. The king may invite fairies to the christening, but he must invite all the fairies or frightful results will follow. Bluebeard's wife may open all doors but one. A promise is broken to a cat and the whole world goes wrong. A promise is broken to a yellow dwarf and the whole world goes wrong. A man and a woman are put in a garden on condition that they do not eat one fruit. They eat it and lose their joy in all the fruits of the earth.
Yeah, and that's the that's the other thing. Like, especially when you're younger and haven't seen like how these things play out and haven't seen what can happen. Like a lot of the rules, a lot of the morality just seems kind of random and like, okay, why does this matter? But then, once you've gotten to see what can happen, you're like, oh, but at some point, like, if you're not going to do and end up wrecking yourself, at some points you just have to say, okay, God knows better than I do. These people, who have been thinking about this and have seen, human experience over thousands of years are a little smarter than me. I don't get this. I don't get why this is so important, but sometimes you just have to say, okay, those are the rules.
A little later on in the same essay, Chesterton gives a beautiful illustration of that. He says, "It is strange and weird that I cannot with safety drink 10 bottles of champagne. But then the champagne itself is strange and weird if you come to that."
It's what is defamiliarization is, and that's something that Chesterton is pretty good at. Is taking something we're a bit too used to, and reminding us that no, it's actually a beautiful and magical thing in itself. And yeah, it's what was the reason the apples are gold in the old stories is to remind us of that moment when we first found out that apples are red.
Yes.
Okay, well, like I said, I don't know why, because this is a really great poem. I don't really feel like I have that much more, unless one of you wants to kind of take the lead on this. I'm running out. I'm running out quickly tonight.
I think I'm pretty much done.
Okay, well, I guess it's about like 40 minutes or so. So yeah, that's not too bad. Well, thank you for joining us, Mr. Simon.
Thank you for having me. And
And
remember, one of the other things that Lewis said in Perelandra and in other places is that most often evil begins from trying to hold on to a particular good past its time. So I thank you for inviting me to share in this good, and I see that it's time to let it go.
well, I hope you are joining us, and maybe when I come across another one that you like, I'll see if you want to join us again.
I would be
And
honored.
good night. I will close the broadcast now.